Hello everyone, welcome to Asura Psych, and today I want to talk about MBTI types and how they relate to the idea of empathy, and what empathy really is. I think a lot of people in the personality community and in mental health communities altogether really throw around the term empathy without really understanding what it really means to be empathetic. And I think that if one is to throw around the word empathy without really understanding what empathy really is, it can actually be more harmful than it is good to be empathetic through some of these definitions that I've been hearing. So I really want to kind of clarify what empathy is today and talk about how it relates to personality type. Let's get into it. So if you ask the average person what they think empathy is, they're most likely going to respond with something along the lines of, empathy is the ability to feel what another person is feeling, to put yourselves in their shoes and feel what they feel. And while that does hold some truth, I think that really misses the point of what empathy really is and how it is properly meant to be used in the human psyche and in psychology. Because simply feeling what someone else is feeling misses the entire point of helpful empathy and can actually be potentially dangerous and harmful when someone is working in a helping relationship or in something along the lines of counseling. So, I'm a psychology major, but I minored in human services. And human services is a lot like psychology, but it's more so focusing on problems that don't have to deal with more severe mental health issues and things that can be solved with a little bit of empathy and understanding, more like natural life situations and problems. You could think of this as a social worker, as someone who might work in the human services field. And if you've ever taken a human services class, you'll know that every chapter of every textbook that you get in human services education will contain the word empathy because it's really important in the helping professions and in helping positions such as counseling. And the reason for this is because you need to be able to understand how someone else is feeling. You need to be able to understand where they're coming from and the problems they're having from their perspective. And that is what empathy is. Empathy is not when you put yourself in someone else's shoes and feel what they feel, but it instead is when you're able to look at things from their perspective, but also understand things from your perspective as the helper. You need to be able to put yourself in their shoes while still being able to maintain your own emotions. You're separating the emotions that you have from the emotions of the other person while still understanding their perspective. I think a lot of people tend to confuse empathy with emotional mirroring. And emotional mirroring is when you kind of mirror the emotions of someone else or you directly take on their emotions. That is kind of what people think of empathy as, and that's not really what empathy is. Empathy, again, is the ability to put yourself in someone else's perspective while not directly taking on their emotions. The issue with emotional mirroring is that you're taking on the exact same emotions of the other person. You're experiencing what they're experiencing. And while that is certainly helpful in certain situations, it is not often helpful in the direct helping relationship or something along the lines of a professional helping relationship such as counseling. Because in counseling, you need to be able to work with someone else and understand their problems, but also see things from an objective point of view. And that's where empathy is helpful because you're still allowing yourself to have that outside perspective. You're not simply taking on the direct emotions of another person. All of that said, emotional mirroring certainly has its uses and can be very helpful in certain scenarios. Take, for example, you're upset or angry about something. You're likely to go to a friend or family member first, and they're likely going to respond to you with some form of emotional mirroring. They're likely going to match your emotions in some way and also be sad or angry with you. But as someone who's going to be in a helping relationship or in a position where you're going to help someone get past a problem, you need to be able to approach the situation instead with empathy. You need to understand their perspective without putting yourself in their direct emotional shoes. You don't want to be feeling directly what they're feeling because then you can't help them grow past the problem that they're facing. You see, emotional mirroring is more so an immediate alleviation to an emotional problem compared to having empathy, which is going to allow you to help someone long-term by understanding them and their perspective. Because if you mirror someone else's emotions when they come to you with a problem, you're going to help them get over it in the now. They're going to be able to maybe calm down from the surge of emotions that they're experiencing in the moment. But if you approach someone with empathy and understanding, then you can really understand their perspective and understand where they're coming from and help them move forward. So how does all of this relate to MBTI and MBTI types? Well, dominant feeling types, IFP types, and EFJ types are more likely going to respond with something along the lines of emotional mirroring compared to empathy until they develop the skill of empathy. Why is this? because these feeling dominant types respond with a judging function. They respond with how their values match what it is they're experiencing instead of perceiving an issue first, typically. And this is why it's important for feeling dominant types to develop their auxiliary perceiving function if they truly want to be empathetic. Because there's this bias in the MBTI community that feeling types are naturally more empathetic than thinking types. And while this may be true on average, it is something that the feeling dominant person still has to develop. They're not going to naturally be empathetic. Not every ENFJ is going to be naturally empathetic. Not every INFP is going to be naturally empathetic. This is something that they have to develop. And if they go around throwing around the phrase empathy while not really understanding that empathy is something that has to be developed, it has to be a skill that is grown over time, then they're really going to potentially do more harm than good. All of this is where one of the big misunderstandings of MBTI types comes from, and that's that thinking types are not as empathetic as feeling types, and this simply just isn't true. Thinking types can be just as empathetic as a feeling type, but the thinking type is going to respond to their perceptions in a different way compared to the feeling type. Whereas the feeling type is more likely to directly take on the emotions of another person or experience it through the lens of values, the thinking type is going to respond by trying to help the person get past the issue. Because they think of things in terms of logic and efficiency, they want to help the person by giving them a realistic solution to the problem they're facing. And you might think, well, that's not empathetic. You just sometimes have to be there for somebody. And yes, that's true. But you also need to have somebody who's going to help them get past an issue. And that's why thinking types can often do well in terms of fields like counseling and therapy when they really begin to understand how to develop empathy just as the feeling types need to. When they really start to see things from the perspective of another person and then use their ability to be logical to help them get past the issue, to approach the situation from an objective viewpoint. One of the reasons Carl Jung referred to the introverted intuitive dominant types, INTJs and INFJs, as empaths is because through introverted intuition as their dominant process, they're going to attempt to view things from as many perspectives as they can before they make any final decisions. As a perceiving dominant type, they want to gather as much information as they can before they move on to the decision-making process. And this is why INFJs tend to really excel in the field of psychology and counseling, specifically in fields that involve empathy, because they're going to look at things from that perspective, from a realistic empathy perspective, before they make the decision that is then based on values through extroverted feeling. Now, you're not as likely to see an INTJ in the counseling fields, but you're just as likely to see them in something along the lines of clinical psychology, where empathy is going to be a little less present because you're dealing with something that has to do with a little bit more severe mental illness, a little bit more abstract theory and logic behind it. Because these people are going to help people by giving them realistic solutions to their long-term problems. Take, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, where you're going to help someone develop a plan to get over an issue. That's where an INTJ might excel in counseling and psychology compared to an INFJ, who is going to excel in direct one-on-one counseling more so. Overall, the biggest thing I want people to take away from this video is that empathy is not a naturally given skill to all feeling types. It's not something that every feeling type is going to have. It is a skill that must be learned by everyone. Some people are going to be naturally empathetic. I would argue that the introverted intuitive dominants might be a little bit more empathetic even if they're not going to respond in such a way because of their perspective-based approach to things. But empathy is a skill that must be developed by everyone. It is not something that is naturally given. And emotional mirroring is not empathy in the same way that people tend to think it is. It's important for people to know the distinctions between emotional mirroring and empathy if they really want to help people grow and get past the issues they're facing in life. All right, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion on empathy and how it relates to the MBTI types. I think it's really important for people to understand what empathy is, because so many people use the phrase or term empathy without really knowing what it is that they're saying, and they think that emotional mirroring is the same as empathy, and I think that's actually potentially harmful, and I just wanted to help clear some things up for everybody with this video. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. I would like to remind everyone that I do have personality typing sessions available at asurapsych.com. You can check the description box below for more information. This has been Asura at Asura Psych. Have a good one.